just listening to Xander's request for the Dhamma talk and thinking, oh, maybe we just have him do that a few times and call it an evening. It's such a nice quality of timbre and pitch and enthusiasm. I was admiring the fortitude of the people who just came back from a long day in the car and time at Fremont Monastery, with paying respects to Lungpa Mahaprasert, driving back all the way, starting early this morning, and still having the energy to come to evening puja. Based on a strong intention, I think, to practice Dhamma. I was thinking about what to talk about this evening, and reinforced with some of the tea time discussions we had. Maybe talk a little bit about a mental quality that's at play in our lives pretty much most of the time that we're engaging in our activities of the world, the quality of intention. And it's come up a fair amount recently for us because we've started our Vinaya classes, which we traditionally do through the Vasa period, this 3-month period of the Vasa, with a lot of classes, readings, discussions on the Buddhist monastic code, the precepts that we follow as monastics, which of course tie in very closely with the precepts that everybody follows as a Buddhist practitioner, whether lay or monastic. And one of the qualities that often comes up in the discussions around the rules of training is this quality of intention. There are many factors that are discussed in the Vinaya, many aspects of each of the rules of training as to determine whether a certain action is considered to be an offense, like a breaking of a rule, or not, or the level of severity of the offense is oftentimes the quality of intention behind any of these actions of body or speech is a determinant factor. And intention is also not only just a factor in terms of whether something's an offense or not, but also just in the quality of the result of any action that we have, whether it's by speech or by action in the body. The quality of intention is a large determining factor for the results that will come from that action, on an internal level especially. It's the motivating force behind the law of karma. So intention, Pali word cetana, is something that we often take a very close look at. The rules that we follow for behavior, for our body and our speech, are not just rules to follow because they seem like they're good things to do. That there's some sort of external definition of morality that says this is right, this is wrong. It is that to some extent, but it's also the practice of virtue, practice of sila, not just following rules for the sake of following rules, but for developing that transformation of the heart that leads to peace and skill and goodness on an interior level. So it's using certain standards of activity, behavior, speech that also support that purity in the heart, purity in the mind, that allows one to establish a strong foundation for the path to liberation. Without it, there's really no firm standing for us as we pick up the other aspects of the practice, like meditation, development of discernment. So it's important to see the effects of our activities of body and speech, especially, and the rules that we follow, the precepts that we follow. Important to see the effect that it has in the mind, and oftentimes there are very clear standards that become apparent. It helps us, these standards of behavior help us to see very clearly the quality of intention in our mind, because we sometimes have to restrain our behaviors in keeping the precepts. And by not acting blindly on impulses that come up and having a bit of restraint in what we say and how we act, forces us to see these pushes in the mind, these internal forces that are always at play that determine how we experience the world. So the restraints of following the precepts are a very clear mirror for us to see this quality of intention. What is it that, what is the mind pushing me to do? Because this quality of intention is a force, it's a push. It's this rising up to take some sort of action. And you can feel it, especially as your meditation practice develops, as the mind quiets, then you can start to see these surges of energy moving in a kind of a direction to take action. It's the precursor of most of our actions of body and speech. And if we get to know that surge of energy as it's starting to arise, then before we take action that's going to result in something that we're going to be regretting later on, some unskillful kind of experience or behavior, if we're aware of the intentional energy that's arising before it, oftentimes we can stop it from happening, and so that we don't experience the consequences of unskillful behavior. So, looking at intention as a basis for these precepts or as our actions can be quite a skillful practice. It's also useful to kind of tease out the difference between intention and another mental quality called motivation. Because sometimes we think of them as the same thing, but there are some differences between them. So let's say you have an action you do an action that causes some harm. Just to use an example, walking down the path and maybe it's dark or it's nighttime or your attention is somewhere else, and you step on a lizard and kill it. There is an action there that's caused harm, but there was no intention to kill that lizard. So in a sense, there's no karmic effect from having unintentionally killed a lizard, unless you were just being incredibly careless and not watching at all where you're going. Then there might be a slight kind of reverberation from the carelessness, but just generally speaking, no intention, no karmic result in that kind of instance. But if you're walking down the path and you see a lizard and you hate lizards and you feel like the world should be completely rid of lizards and you step on it and annihilate it, not a likely thing to do, but if you were to do that, then yes, the karmic effects of taking life intentionally will be much greater. By the way, don't do that because our lizards carry this kind of enzyme that neutralizes Lyme disease, so they're our friends. But you can see the quality of intention to kill is present or not present, depending on our state of mind when that event happens. So that's a time when an action that results in something that's harmful is not actually consequential in terms of karma. It's also good to tease out the difference between, say, motivation and intention, and just using that as an example, or that particular activity of taking life as an example. Oftentimes, it's discussing like, well, what about, like, say, the taking of a human life? Are there some circumstances when that's justifiable and that there's not an unskillful or a negative result, so that the example sometimes given of taking life out of compassion for someone who's experiencing, say, deep pain or difficulty, or is in the dying process, or mental difficulty in that process. Is there a justification for taking life, ending it sooner than it would naturally occur? And it's good to tease out that difference. They say, well, some people would say, oh, well, that's a compassionate intention. But actually, in the Buddha's language, intention generally is referring to the intention to take some sort of action. So whether it's, and the motivation is a different factor. So there's a motivation, say, of taking life that could be very, very unskillful in terms of if it's based in anger and hatred and rage and the wish to, say, annihilate somebody who is causing you problems, and it moves to that action of killing, then the karmic consequence is very significant, because the motivation behind the intention to kill is very negative. But say somebody takes life during let's say an assisted suicide for a terminal illness, there is still that intention to kill. And even with a compassionate motivation, there will be consequence from just stopping the life force, the life faculty, stopping that unnaturally ahead of the natural life force, according to the Buddhist teachings. The motivation being one to relieve pain or relieve suffering will have a different result karmically, in that it wouldn't be probably as severe a result karmically as it would be if it was out of anger. Yet there will still be a reaction, a consequence. Naturally taking life for even compassionate motivation still will have a consequence of some sort. What it will be, very hard to say. Very, very, very hard to say. So motivation does have a mitigating quality to it, and is different from intention. So these are the kinds of things that we've been discussing, say, in our Vinaya classes. We still establish our intention not to take life for any means, but we can establish an intention to relieve suffering in any way that we can through skillful means. So our actions really point us always back to what's the mental quality behind it, what's the intention, what's the motivation. How can we be aware of what we're doing before and while we're doing it, so that the actions we do take, whether body or speech, are the most skillful possible, and will cause the least repercussions through our hearts, through our minds as possible, so that we don't have to second guess, we don't have to constantly rehash, go through the stories all over again many times to quell any doubts that we might have or questions about our motivation. And a lot of it is just taking care and time, developing mindfulness, as Ajahn was talking about the other night, the quality of mindfulness, the skillfulness of developing mindfulness and clear comprehension to help us slow down the process of blind reaction or blind action, to really see the underlying mental qualities that are driving us throughout our daily lives. Kind of along that whole line of life support, and I have had a very strong memory of the time when my father was on life support after in a terminal illness and emergency, and went to the hospital and they put him on life support, and then it was up to us to figure out whether to keep him on it or take him off of it. And this was before I was a monk. Was working as a hospice nurse, and I had a very strong sense of knowing that his life was coming to a close, and not wanting to prolong it. And I had many discussions about how he definitely did not want to be on life support when his time was coming, and so I felt quite clear and quite certain, and that's what we needed to do. And I think had a fairly strong influence on the decision of my family members, his wife, and my siblings, to do that, to take that action to withdraw from life support, because it wasn't cutting off the life faculty before its time. It was just allowing it not to be extended beyond when it should be, and to allow the natural processes to take their path. I think the mistake I made in retrospect was acting on my certainty and kind of pushing the decision in that direction fairly quickly, not allowing my stepmother and brother and sister to come to that sense of conclusion themselves in their own time. And the result of that was a fairly long period afterwards of them going through this questioning: did we do the right thing? So that, in a sense, was my karmic consequence of acting quickly based on a level of certainty that was the right decision, having thought through it myself quite a lot beforehand and discussed it with my father. But just realizing that, when it comes to these levels of decisions, and we're looking at our intentions and we're looking at our motivations, that it all is it behooves us to be careful and to take our time with that, and to allow and to be sensitive to the world around us and the people who we're sharing that with, to make sure that things like that are done in a way that leaves a lot fewer ambiguities, and that people won't have to rehash it as much as we did. But this is a force that plays out, or that pushes us into action in many different ways too. The pretty dramatic ones that I was talking about, just as examples of the quality of intention and motivation. But that applies in pretty much anything that we do. And when we're looking at the ways that we want to develop ease and well-being in the heart, and looking at our patterns, our established patterns of behavior, and the intentions and motivations that cause us to act and speak. There's a lot of subtlety in there, and a lot of the process of choosing what to develop and what to abandon in terms of skillful and unskillful qualities depends on really clearly seeing that motivation, that intention behind what we're doing. So you can have, say, an action of service or wanting to help, and the quality of the effect on the mind will be different depending on the motivation. So, sometimes we want to do something that's, say, an act of service or an act of giving, generosity. And if we look at it very clearly and ask ourselves, well, why is it that I'm doing this? Why is it that I want to do that? Maybe we'll see that, actually, I'm looking for some recognition. I'm looking for some praise from doing this. And then if we do that action, even if it's a good, skillful action, something that's helpful, and we don't get that recognition or that validation from it, then we suffer a little bit, maybe just a little bit or maybe a lot, depending on what it is and what our expectations were. But our motivation for doing something skillful can have unskillful results if we don't get what it is that we are seeking. Whereas, say, we do the same act, the exact same thing, and we look at our motivation of, I just enjoy doing it because it feels good and it makes somebody else happy, and when somebody else is happy, I'm happy too. It kind of ennobles the mind, as they say. When that's the motivation, then the result on the interior is very different. The result in the exterior may be the same. The person feels good, they appreciate the service or the generosity, but the quality of the experience internally is going to be different. And so whatever we do, whether it's an unskillful action or a skillful action, let it be a mirror for the internal qualities that we're trying to develop, and see if we can sort of simplify our lives and see the drives that are constantly pushing us into action one way or another. We can, oftentimes we do something that in our heart of hearts we might know is a bit unskillful, but we've got all these voices inside our head pointing us, trying to justify why we need to do something, trying to establish a skillful motivation when it actually really isn't something so skillful, or trying to argue for doing something that may not be such a good thing to do. Ajahn Amaro used to refer to that as the internal lawyer, striking up a discussion to try and convince you to do something, justifying things. So be aware when that internal lawyer is taking hold, is trying to weasel a justification out of something that may be better not done. So these are the more subtle aspects of looking at intention, motivation. Then as our practice matures and as we get to see these qualities of mind a little more clearly, we learn to act on skillful intentions and motivations, and to not act on the ones that look like they're going to be leading to harm in some way, even subtle harm. Then the mind becomes more clear. We're starting to use our wisdom faculty. And that's what meditation really is all about. It's getting quiet enough in the mind to be able to see these subtle changes, or these subtle tendencies, so that we can choose to increase our responses that will give wholesome results, good results, results that lead to peace and clarity and understanding and kindness and compassion, and to not act on those impulses that lead to difficulty and suffering for ourselves and others, the unwholesome qualities. That's what meditation really is all about, is being able to see clearly the choices that we have in terms of moving the mind towards wholesome and away from unwholesome actions. And then further developing an awareness of qualities that the Buddha refers to as the karma that leads to the end of karma, so that we're not just choosing to increase wholesome, karmically wholesome activities, but also ones that are so karmically wholesome that they lead us on the path to liberation. Essentially, those kinds of activities and actions that are part of the Noble Eightfold Path, that are so skillful that they lead to the ending of karma, the ending of the karmic process altogether, the Eightfold Path. And this quality of mindfulness and clear comprehension, these qualities are what keeps us coming back to really examining the mind and where we want to put our attention. And the more we slow down the mind, the process, and get to understand its motivations and its movements, there comes a quality of understanding. We start to see along the lines of the qualities of Dhamma more clearly, the clear arising and ceasing of all fabrications, of all constructions, physical, mental. We start to get a hit on the quality of the arising and ceasing nature, and also the aspect of not self, the selfless nature of all of these qualities that we're talking about. Volition or intention, keeping along that theme, is a very interesting one in that it often does come with a strong sense of self. You know, when you think about the reactions in the mind and the push of the mind, there's a sense of control that's at the base of this perception of self, a sense of somebody who's in charge and has some control. Very strong basis for this perception of me or mine. And just as an example again of when we're in contact and we have a very strong feeling coming up, say of somebody that's doing something that's unskillful and it's affecting us in some way, and there rises up this energy in the body and in the mind of I need to do something about this. I need to give this person some feedback. And that rising up of that volition to act, the volition, the intention to say something, has a very strong quality of self to it. That power to say something or do something is usually very much wrapped up with a sense of self. And so that even the quality of volition, the quality of intention, chaitana, is what we say. Well, it's like, I am in charge of this response. I have the will. I have the volition to make this happen. But when we examine things more clearly, more quietly, we can actually see and catch that quality of volition and see. Actually, it's just another dependently arising mental factor in and of itself. It's not me who's doing it, because in the Buddhist description of mind moments. It gets a little bit technical, but in any mind moment you have 5 qualities, according to the Buddha. And the first 3, contact, perception, and feeling, are sort of what happens when we get some input, something comes through our mind, through the sense bases, a sight or a sound, and there's a moment of contact. We recognize that something's happening, and there's a feeling that goes along with it. It's usually pleasant or unpleasant, and some sort of perception of what is happening. It's coming up from past conditioning. And then there's a moment where there's usually a little bit of a gap that we don't see very often before there's a response to that. And it really depends on what the underlying tendency is that's in action at that point. If it's irritation, if it's something that had a past quality of irritation with it, or there was a desire, something extremely desirable that you're contacting and having a feeling about, a feeling of wanting, then it's that particular underlying tendency that rises up and takes control and conditions that volition, that intention to take some action. And there's a strong sense of self involved with that. But really, when you look at it, it's just, not just, but it's void of self. It's just this underlying tendency that's grabbing hold of a perception or a feeling and establishing an intention to act on it, which will then produce a result of some sort, negative or positive. Consequently, we have the choice, and this is what the mindfulness clear comprehension training is all about, is to develop the tendencies towards wisdom, or towards compassion, or towards any skillful qualities like patience, so that those are the qualities that rise up when there's an experience of some sort that might need some action or might result in some action. And if it's those qualities that rise up instead of the greed, hatred, and delusion, if it's the qualities of wisdom and discernment, compassion that rise up, then the action that is taken, the volition that arises, is going to steer us down a skillful track. So, and then there is a result from that too. So you can see, actually, teasing it out, the more clearly you can see this process happening, the more you see that it's really just a series of mental factors that are all playing off against each other. And we have a certain amount of control as to what we remember, the mindfulness, bringing up the quality of mindfulness, and the direction that we put it in through our attention. After intention, we usually shift our attention to an object of some sort or a behavior of some sort. And there is a modicum of control into what we remember to attend to, whether it's the skillful qualities or what we allow ourselves to attend to in terms of the unskillful qualities that rise up. But teasing these out as just mental factors that are dependently arising constantly over and over and over again can give us this perspective of there's no independent agent who's controlling all of this. It's a series of mental factors that are rising and passing away, that we can develop certain skills around, so that we still live and react and experience the world. We still have our joys and sorrows, our pleasantness and the unpleasantness. We make our mistakes. We learn from them. And there's choices of how we direct our attention and direct our intentions to produce more skill and balance. And we have a growing sense that it doesn't have to necessarily be associated with this sense of me or mine. And there's a certain, not just a certain, there's a huge amount of freedom that comes from that. Stepping back from this self-perception. One still acts, one still intends, but it's based on wisdom, discernment, and clarity, rather than confusion and ignorance. So, back to my original thought of how to use the Dhamma and the Vinaya together is not just the teachings and the training as separate as separate things, but they're very much integrated. So that how we choose to train our minds through body and speech activities, the Vinaya, the code of discipline, the precepts, has a very, very strong effect on our Dhamma practice, our Dhamma considerations. They work together. The Dhamma really doesn't work without the Vinaya or the precepts, and the precepts really, they would just be meaningless and empty, activities without the teachings that are directing us in terms of understanding the cause of suffering and the end of suffering. So this is just a way of saying how to use the practice of training our body and our speech to see how it affects the mind and how we can use them both synergistically to take us fully to liberation. So I'll leave it there for a few comments this evening. That's 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 this evening.